everybody. That's good, it's working. Yeah, thanks, Mary. As Mary said, I'm Andrew Harmel-Law. My pronouns are he, him, and at ThoughtWorks, I'm what we call a tech principal. But for all the clients, or 95% of the clients that I work with and work for, I'm a software architect. And being a software architect has been stressing me out for quite a long time, which is kind of refers back to Anna's talk that she gave yesterday. It's been stressing me out, and I'm going to tell you the story about how it stressed me out, and I'm going to share with you how I fixed it, because I think it unlocks a new way of looking at architecture and making architectural decisions and things. So, the software that we build has changed dramatically over the last few years. The architecture of the software that we build, to the extent that one of the speakers who spoke this morning were talking about, they were kind of justifying why they were building a modular monolith when, not many years ago, we would have been proudly building modular monoliths. So stuff's changed. The reason it's changed is because things that used to be hard are now really easy. The things that used to be really expensive are now really cheap. And lots of new stuff is happening all the time. So things are changing, and things are changing really fast. And that's good, right? Technology is moving really fast. The problem is, I'm not sure, maybe it's just me, but I'm not sure that the way we design and do the act of coming up with those architectures has kept up. I think that the memes of the Ivory Tower, for example, still hold far more than a little bit of actual basis in reality. So I've worked with lots of clients. Luckily, I haven't ever been staffed as an Ivory Tower architect, because I think ThoughtWorks would probably say no to that. But I've worked with and kind of interacted with what you might typically describe as Ivory Tower architecture functions quite a lot, right? So I've spoken to and taken part in architectural review boards. I've helped contribute to and maybe been on the receiving end of PowerPoint architectures. I've worked with or tried to work with company-wide frameworks which have been imposed from on high, and the reason why those company-wide frameworks are imposed from on high is typically because it's decided that by adopting that framework, some spreadsheet of cross-functional requirements, as we call them at ThoughtWorks, or non-functional requirements, as many other people call them, by adopting this framework, we'll meet those cross-functional requirements, right? And those are all hidden away in some spreadsheet. So that's kind of, the Ivory Tower way of doing things, right? And I don't think many people would argue for this way of doing things these days, but they still exist. But it doesn't so much feel, when I've been working with or even getting quite close to Ivory Tower architects, it doesn't feel like I'm living in an Ivory Tower. Ivory Tower implies that the people in the Ivory Tower are having an awesome time because they've got a great view. But it doesn't. Even to the people in these Ivory Tower roles, they frequently feel like they're a drag, right? So I'm stressed because I have to have worked with this. I don't whenever I try and work as an architect or fulfill an architecture function for a client, I try and live up to, or have in the past tried to live up to, another kind of classic meme which we have. So architects, if people do still describe themselves as an architect, and I do, then we'll be a hands-on architect, right? Hands-on architect. Everybody wants to be a hands-on architect. And hands-on architect, exactly right. People are putting their hands up. Hands-on architects, that's a good thing, right? So hands-on architects, we're running around, we're trying to support all of these new empowered autonomous teams who have got, aligned to product verticals, and they're delivering features and value over and over again. We're working with all these teams, we're going to sit down with these teams, either virtually or in real life. We're creating architectures, and we're doing the best we can, trying to understand their context and give them the support that they need. But this is hard too, right? These teams are trying to move really fast. We might, if we're lucky, leave behind a nice coherent picture on a Miro board or a real whiteboard in real life. We might have, if we're lucky, paired with the lead or someone on that team. But then we abandon them, right? Because we've got to move on to the next team to help them out with doing the stuff that they're trying to do. So we're hoping that stuff that we worked on with them is going to get into production. So this is giving me nightmares too, right? I'm the bottle, right? I'm the person sleeping in this nightmare scenario, because no matter how well we do this, being a hands-on architect is still hard, right? You're still running around. And that horse, that's I'm not going to talk about that bit of the nightmare, but the horse's head was terrible. So luckily, and this actually kind of, I'm adding bits to this, but luckily, after one particularly stressful night, I woke up and I kind of had, not a vision, but things had become clear. And what had become clear was a kind of architectural software architecture way of looking at this. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to show you what I think is a summary of the pain points and the stress I was feeling in the form of a logical architecture diagram constructed with emojis, because who doesn't dream in logical architecture diagrams made up of emojis? So whether I'm in an Ivory Tower function or if I'm a hands-on architect, this is how it feels like it works. Teams need decisions, either made for them or help with those decisions or approval for those decisions. They come to me, I'm the bottle. The decision is then made in some form with them, and then they put that decision into production. Other teams come along, autonomous, independent teams, right? That's the right way to do it. Accelerate tells us, and we all agree. They come to me, the bottle. We do some design, we maybe write some documentation, they put that into production. They put that into production and they learn something about the design when they put it into prod, but I don't know because I've moved on to another design, to another team, right? Because I'm doing a good job. The better I do at my job, the more teams want to engage me and try and get my help and assistance. So more teams are coming along with problems or whatever, or new features they need help on, and now a queue is forming, right? And this is where I get stressed. And then I'm spending less time with teams. So maybe some stuff is getting into production, but people aren't really understanding what they've done or why it was important, because I've disappeared before we got to that point. Or maybe stuff's getting put into production, which isn't really the right thing, right? Maybe the design was bad and then they put that in production, it didn't work. Or maybe the design was good, but that wasn't the thing that ended up in production, right? Stuff happens. So that's kind of like how it feels to me. So if we step back, like I said, this is kind of like a logical architecture diagram of how stuff works, right? If we take a step back, we can see the 3 pain points. Number one, I'm trying to be, whatever role I'm trying to play, I'm trying to be in a lot of different places at once. So I'm a blocker, right? I'm a bottleneck. And queues are forming. Number two, if I sit down with a team and we do a design, there's no guarantee that design is going to get its way into prod. And I've disappeared before I get the feedback from that. And number three, even if we are lucky and we do good design and we work well together and it does get into prod, we're building evolutionary architectures, right? So there's no guarantee that another decision will come along and another small piece of architecture will come along for that team. There's no guarantee that that's going to survive and still work its way into prod, right? So it might break again because we keep going through the thing. So this is stressing me out, right? So how can we fix it? Well, it's an architectural problem, right? So what if we go back to a blank sheet of paper and redesign this, thinking like software developers, software architecture, software leads, right? So there's things that we still need. We still have lots of, or hopefully we've got lots of separate, independent, autonomous teams, because Accelerate tells us it's a good thing to do. Teams will begin needing decisions, and they will end up with decisions, and then they'll put those decisions into production. What would be really nice would be a non-blocking, massively parallel way of approaching things. What we want is a decentralized way to make decisions, right? Not a centralized, not me getting in the way on purpose or by accident. You don't want that. So it'd be really nice if we could have something here, something which fills the void in here and gets us this decentralized way of making decisions, right? What might be one way of doing this? But it turns out there are some ways of doing this, but they're very little known about. I didn't know about them for a long time. I just thought the way that things worked were the way things worked. But there is one process which I'm going to tell you about for the rest of this talk, and it's called the advice process. It comes from trust or teal organizations. It's fully decentralized. It avoids the need for consensus. It's pull-based, so the teams pull in the expertise they need as opposed to having to be pushing things out to go and get decisions made for them. And the key thing is it's non-blocking, right? So from an architectural perspective, that's good. So what's the advice process? The advice process is going to fit on this slide, so if you want to get your cameras ready, you'll be able to take the entire meat of this talk in a single photograph, and then you can ignore me for the rest of the time. So the rule is anybody can make any decision, full stop. There isn't a full stop because there's 2 extra bits, but that's fundamentally the rule. Anyone can make any decision. But before doing so, they must seek advice, not approval, not permission, advice. They must seek advice from all affected parties and people with expertise. That's it. Take photographs. That's the advice process. All done. So that's it, right? That's the end of my talk. Stop being a blocker, use the advice process. It's totally awesome. I mean, Humaira talked before me, and it was an awesome talk, so I could relate to tons of the stuff she talked about. This might, for some decisions, this might help. Right, so that's awesome. I can guarantee there are people sitting out there thinking, that's awesome, but I can think of 20 ways this is going to go wrong. I completely hear you. I am now going to list 3 ways that this can go wrong. That's the rest of my talk. So we're making decentralized decisions. Awesome, right? Boom, stuff's going to blow up. Number 1, we need to support those less experienced in decision making. I'm awesome at making decisions. Everyone always thinks they're great at making decisions. It's just other people making decisions that they disagree with. I think as Humaira said, a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and software developers have more than their fair share, right? So but we want to people have experience in making decisions. We want to support them. If we are playing some role, or if we care about the sum of all of the architectural decisions across the whole piece of, suite of software we're working on, we want to know what's happening. And we also want to know if this advice process is the thing we're leaning on. We want to know who is consulted and what they said. So how might we do that? It turns out you're probably already using the mechanism to do this, but you're not realizing it. The way we do this is with lightweight architectural decision records. They help you or let you meet every single one of these 3 extra kind of needs, right? And they're good for this because they're not just decision records. The structure of an ADR helps you to make good decisions. You can make good decisions by filling in the ADR, right? Not doing the thinking and all the work and then just writing it down. Use the ADR to make your decision. Here's an example. Number 1, the title. The title should state what the decision is. Here, we have decided to use short inventory IDs. You write it at the end, but if you've got to the end of your decision process and you can't write the decision in the title, you've probably got a problem. First thing inside the ADR will be the decision summary. Again, you'll write this almost second last. Maybe you write that just before you write the title. But the decision summary should be possible to sit there and write all this stuff down and go, right, okay, these are the things we've done. You should be able to be clear about this thing. If you aren't, then maybe your decision is something you should go back and look at again. But these are at the end. What about the very start? The context for people starting off making decisions, the context is the bit that people frequently don't fill in or frequently fill in very rapidly. What they need to do is fill this in, put in real effort into it, because it helps you think about what is the series of events, the needs, the landscape, everything that has driven us to this point that we need to make this decision. Fill in the context, right? There's a bunch of stuff here. Building ID is currently a long thing. It's annoying us, so we write down all of the stuff that made this decision necessary. Next up is consequences. Consequences, again, something that I don't even always see it in ADRs, but you should. The consequences, you've described where you are in the context. Now in the consequences, you're describing, we've come up with 3 or 4 options. We should describe the consequences at least of the option that we've selected. I've seen people who are learning to do this. They will think about the consequences of every single option that they've thought about. Because it's good, you're looking into the future. And you're not just thinking about the consequences for you, because again, I think as Myra said as well, loads of people love to build reusable stuff, but they don't like to reuse. So you put yourself in the shoes of the person who is going to kind of be affected by this downstream. Loads of consequences there. And then the last bit, this is the bit that I've added on top of the standard template, the comments. The comments is where the advice is recorded. So you can see who gave what advice and when. So that's awesome. But also you can look at the comments, because remember, it's just advice. The team making the decision or the person making the decision can ignore it. You can look back at the rest of the ADR and go, that's interesting. This comment is amazing. This has obviously changed thinking and has become central to the decision. This one has been completely ignored, right? Right or wrong, good or bad, whatever. But you can see that stuff. It's there. So that's it, right? That's the end of the talk. I'm going quite fast, so this is good. You've got loads of time. You can go and have another coffee break and get more stickers in the hall. Lightweight ADRs, I would argue, and this is from experience, will give you all of these things, right? So we are now supporting those less experienced in decision making. We can see from the comments who was consulted and what their advice is. And the third bit, if we're doing ADRs properly, so many people who talk about ADRs, thought workers included, say you should put the ADRs, the decision records, in the tooling that you use to write software. So you might put it on a wiki, close to the, all of the other pieces of stuff, the documentation you create for development, or you put it in source control as a markdown file, or, this is a bit controversial, you might put it in Jira or another work item management thing. I actually have ended up using that process a lot, but you'll put it in the tooling. It's not some weird other place, right, owned by architects. It's in the dev tooling. And the benefit of this is all of these allow you to subscribe to the thing. If you want to like find out which ADRs are in draft, just subscribe, right, to the wiki space or to the repository, the change section of the repository. You'll see this stuff coming in. You don't need to, you're not putting an extra burden, an extra responsibility on people who you've given this power and responsibility to. You can find out. So that's awesome. We're good. So we're done, right? That's it. That's the end of my talk. It's not the end of my talk. We got more. Because you're probably still, I didn't think you would applaud. There is more, there's more. So it's cool. But, so then you're still sitting there thinking, I guarantee there's people sitting there thinking, and this one actually, so there's a blog I wrote about this, where this talk comes from. It's on martinfowler.com. Martin Fowler gave me the next bit of feedback. So like, advice, sorry, he gave me advice. I was like, oh God, he's right. So he's like, this could be really slow. You could spend a lot of time asking a lot of people for advice. And he was right. Right? So this is software. If we're thinking about this like software developers, leads, architects, people responsible for building things, we're trying to wipe the old architecture out, go back, start again from first principles. Can we refactor it? Can we not change the key fundamental aspects of something, just like with refactoring, but change how it does it? So not what it does, but how it does it. Turns out we can. So to remind everyone, we've got the key thing, advice process. If you're feeling brave, you could just go with that. I would advise you don't. Whenever I've done it, you also had lightweight ADRs. What's the third thing? The third thing is what I've called, so I've made this up, this is the bit that I made up, the Architectural Advice Forum. So what's the Architectural Advice Forum? The Architectural Advice Forum is a weekly, informal meeting where the whole point is to seek and receive advice. And in the context of that advice, seek clarification, further advice, further discussion, right? It can be half an hour, it can be an hour. Frequently they run quite long because there's lots of stuff that happens. The key thing is the attendees are the right people. So the attendees are representatives from all of the teams who are following this process, right? So that's people who are likely to be affected. If my team's going to build something and your team's probably going to break downstream, that you're already be invited. Plus people who may have some form of architectural responsibility. That might be the architects, maybe not. But mainly it's the people who you would go to seek advice from. So operations, infrastructure, product management love coming to these meetings because they can see discussions which they'd love to have heard about before they got implemented. Lots of others, regulatory, legal sometimes are there, etc. Security, InfoSec are there. Including, I've always seen, the last 3 times I've done this, the executive have come, the CTOs come. Because it's just advice, right? It's cool. It's kind of like the fear of the CTO being there has been removed because the CTO can only offer you advice, right? The CTO can't say no. They can just say, I would do it like this. So we do this. And what we do is we present everybody who's got an ADR or a spike. So a spike inevitably leads to an ADR in my experience. Those people, those teams present those things. They call out the key points of their decision that they're in the process of trying to make or trying to understand, and they seek advice. Their role in this meeting is to listen to and understand the advice. The role of the advice givers is to give the advice kind of openly and make sure that that's recorded in the form of comments later on, right? There's one other standard thing that we might add to the meeting, and I've typically ended up adding it every time, is we will put in a check. So we look at the statuses of ADRs if they haven't been decided. So maybe there's a reason why it's taking a long time to decide something, but if there isn't, maybe people just need support or something isn't clear, then you can use the forum and the meeting to help people and swarm on things and just get stuff going. And it gives you a mechanism to improve the process, right? To improve, maybe the template needs another field in your organization, something. So that's it. So we refactored to optimize. So that's all good, right? We're not done at this point because there's something I want to make super clear. By returning to first principles, and by kind of wiping the slate clean and just going, acknowledging what we need, but also kind of being honest with ourselves about what might not be needed, what might just be, there because of history. We've arrived at a point that the famous architect Ruth Mallon has been talking about for a long time. So Ruth Mallon, the whole link is in the post I'll link to at the end. But Ruth, a long time ago, wrote an article called "Do We Still Need Architects?" Because people have worried about this for a long time. And I'm going to do one quote from that article. So Ruth said, "In order for an architecture to be successful, it is very much about ensuring that conversations that are needed to be happening are happening. Not always initiating them, nor always helping focus or navigating them, but ensuring that those conversations do happen and guiding when needed." So that's, like, if you think about it, right, she's a very smart person, Ruth Mallon. And this is where, by kind of going back to first principles and putting these pieces together, we've ended up at a similar place, right? We've ended up with a set of conversations. We've ended up with a safe space for learning. We've ended up with empowerment. We've ended up with decentralization. There is still a role for architecture, right? We need to deliver good systems, right? Systems are getting more complicated all the time. So the function of architecture is happening, and the role of an architect is still valid, but it might be a different role. So we're all good, right? We've replaced all that stress. We've got 8 minutes and 49 seconds back. You've got free time back. That's not true. You're probably still concerned. Because again, this sounds like some crazy thing. It's like when you read a book and you're like, this is amazing, I'll just go and do this. And you go and do it, and it turns out that it's easier to read about something in a book than it is to do it in real life with, like, human beings who are hard, man. So that's exactly like this. Same with systems. It's easy to build software, not so easy to run software, right? Speak to the operations people if you're not building and running your own software, right? The ops will tell you that stuff that you think is beautiful is not beautiful, it's a disaster. So we're going to close. This is the last bit. We're going to talk about how to fail, because I've done this in a bunch of places, and it's always awesome, but it's always different, and it's not obvious. So number 1 failure pattern. Bad decisions. Bad in inverted commas. I talked a little bit about this already, actually. Everybody thinks someone else's decision is bad if they disagree with it, which means a lot of people think a lot of decisions are bad. Bad decisions are actually not a failure pattern, they're good, but how you, as a person who previously had some form of authority, respond to them, that is a failure pattern. So if you say that's a bad decision, I'm going to overrule you, I'm not going to stop, I'm just going to, even in my body language, I'm going to communicate that I will not approve this, even if you're saying my advice is, but you're not approving it with your body language, that is a failure pattern. What you want to do is step back, let the team do it. I've got an ex-colleague, a pair at a previous client. He's written a blog post which he's trying to get through his marketing team called the autonomy roller coaster. The roller coaster is describing how it feels in the teams to be given autonomy, but also how it feels as someone who used to have lots of control, letting go of control. Because this is hard, right? You can't say no. But what you can do is, if it's a good decision, celebrate it and admit you were wrong. If it's a bad decision, like stuff turns out to not be as obvious as you thought it was, don't go in there and stop it. Let it happen, but then let that turn into a learning situation so that everybody, not just the team that made it, everybody can learn from that thing. You will be amazed what decisions will come out of this. And even the ones which are less than you would have thought they could be, they'll be good. On the contrary to number 1, failure pattern number 2 is definitely a massive failure pattern. Old guard is the new guard, is you've adopted the process. And it's working amazingly. And you sit there and you look back and you're like, this is amazing. I feel loads of less stress. But you only then do you realize that the people making and taking decisions, the people presenting at the architectural advice forum, the people writing ADRs, they're the same people who used to write the ADRs, right? So you haven't really done anything. You've just been left with where you are. This means that you've got no new decidees, right? There's probably, and I guarantee it, there is definitely people out there who want to make decisions, but they are not taking up that space. And it's you who are failing. If you're the person setting this up, you are the person who is failing to make the space for that, possibly by doing failure pattern number 1. Number 3, off-the-grid decisions. Again, technically a failure pattern, but like number 1, not really a failure pattern. It is, however, a signal that number 2 is happening. Off-the-grid decisions are where people aren't following the advice process and aren't writing ADRs. But they are taking decisions. Good thing, right? You want people to be taking responsibility. So if you find them, what you do is you go and find them, learn from them, don't back them out or whatever, but get the team to write an ADR if they didn't write an ADR, because you don't want a gap in your history of your architecture. And introspect yourself, or whoever the people are who are responsible for setting this up, introspect to find out why that team didn't realize it was a decision, or did but didn't feel safe coming forward to share it as part of the process. That's where the learning happens. That's what you need to do. And then number 4, this is the biggie, no trust. So I said this all comes, or the central core comes from teal or trust organizations. The clue's in the name. They work because people trust each other, fundamentally. If there is no trust, then this thing won't work. You might think it's working because you might see like some form of theater where people are basically kind of writing ADRs based on what they think you think should happen, as opposed to what they think should happen. That's bad. Or you'll see people going through the motions, and then what happens in many places, they deliver something entirely different to production because they know it's going to work, and the thing that they've been told to do doesn't work, right? Those both fail. This works when you see lots of different people and lots of different voices taking the stage, taking decisions, and moving forward with stuff. If it isn't, then you've failed, right? And then it'll fall back to the pain and the stress that you felt before. So that's all of our 4 things. The whole point of this, and let's go back to the start again, right? The whole point of this is we're scaling the practice of architecture. The old way, the bottleneck way, we're building massively parallel systems with low, decentralization, but then we're still trying to build and design and architect and control them, right? With a centralized way of doing things. Why are we doing that? That doesn't make sense. We've like adopted everything apart from gotten rid of the human bottleneck. So we're trying to rescale this, right? And this is a big change. It's an org-wide change. It's a learning change, right? Also, it's a revolution, not in like a raise the red flag kind of way, but a revolution in the original sense of the word, right? We've gone back to the beginning. We've spun the wheel. We've gone back to the start. We still have the same needs. We still need architecture. But let's find out how, in our new way of structuring things and writing code and delivering code, CI/CD, all the stuff ThoughtWorks talks about all the time, let's look at other stuff to see how we can make that work. And what we do is, fundamentally, to go back to the title of the talk, we foster a commune in the Ivory Tower of architecture. So that's what we've done, right? We've broken down the doors of the Ivory Tower. The architecture still needs to happen. We've just invited more people into the Ivory Tower. We've banished the need for PowerPoint because that's been replaced by conversations, learning, development, confidence, right? Architecture is still being done, but now it's being done by anybody. So not everyone. I used to have the slide that said everybody. Maybe not everyone's doing architecture. Some people don't want to do architecture. They're perfectly happy, just working on the stuff that they work on, right? Other people want to, so let's, build a space for them to do that. And there's a key thing that I need to point out here as well. I've likened the way this is structured to the architectures we build. There's another key thing. You might still be thinking out there that this is a little bit light. There isn't any more of this talk. This is the end of the talk. It is light, but then so are things like microservice architecture, right? Microservice architecture is very easy to describe, but the devil is in the detail. The devil is in the specifics of your company. The devil is in the detail of your business, of your infrastructure, of your culture, of your teams, of your everything. This is the same thing, right? When you introduce this to your teams, loads of other stuff appears, just like when you do a microservices architecture or any other decentralized architecture. But that evolves, and those pieces come from organizational learning. So it becomes responsive and adaptive to your culture. So there isn't like a big, 27 bullet point list of what to do. There's these 3 things. So before I finish, I'm going to give you a quick little tip on adoption patterns. So I've rolled this out numerous times. A bunch of other colleagues have rolled this out. It turns out other thought workers had done something very similar, but had a different name for it. So it's definitely not my idea. It's just we all ended up in the same place. One key way to do it is if you are a person who's responsible and has power for this stuff, what you can do is you can start following the advice process yourself. Write ADRs and just to seek advice and tell people what you're doing. Then you can move on to like trying it out with a team. Your team, if that's, if you're a lead, you can do it with your team, just your team. You don't need to do any bigger. And then roll it out maybe to a bigger piece, right? That's how you can do things. And so that's my talk. I had to cram loads of stuff in. There's a gigantic blog post, which is far longer than this, and actually has 2 extra patterns you can adopt, which if you want to kind of scale this up even further, it's in the blog post, so hopefully that thing works. If not, the bit.ly link goes to the article too. I would love to speak to people about this at office hours, because, like I say, I'm still learning all the time. I'm trying to produce lots of other stuff around about this, and so I would love to hear from people, either now or on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle at the bottom. Later on, if people want to tell me it sucked and it won't work because of X, Y, Z. Because it's not, I'm not promising this works everywhere, right? So that's it. Thank you very much.